allow me to introduce Dr. Anne Kovacevic. She's the Australasia Foresight and Innovation Leader for Arup. Her expertise is an experienced sustainable building design engineer, as well as completing executive training in future thinking and strategic development, as well as another panelist with us today, Dr. George Quesada. He also from Australasia Foresight and Innovation Manager from Arup as well. He is a futurist and innovation strategist with a background in organizational psychology and innovation study. Very warm welcome to both of you with us today. And also, shall we start to share our finding from the research project? So as we mentioned that this research project, so because we used to work quite very close, so allow me to call you Anne and George, if you don't mind, for the panelists today, because we would like to make it more casual. We try to interpret the academic work into something or translate into something that more practical for our audience today. Allow me to introduce in terms of this research project, Future of Urbanization Greater Bangkok 2050 is our collaboration between both sides that we start working on this in 2020. Even with the pandemic and everything, but we try best to making sure that we collaborate in terms of framework, expertise, and also get the insight from our stakeholder in order to come up with the potential future for our Greater Bangkok. And for this one, under this project, there are two parts in terms of the products. In the sense of the first one is about Megatrends, which is going to be our main content today. That we see this megatrend as something as an immediate or not too far away future, and Dr. Josh going to mention about this later on. And another part as the episode 2 that Dr. Gandhi mentioned earlier, we are going to present about the future scenario in 2050 as well. And as I mentioned earlier, at the end of this session, we are going to email you about the full report on Megatrend as well as, but for the future scenario, we are going to do that after the session next time. So stay tuned with us. So allow me to turn this back to Anne to provide more information about Foresight to our audience.
Excellent. Thank you, Penin. And we've been doing Foresight at Arup for about 20 years now, and we really try and use robust methods of foresight in order to think about the future and then work with planners, developers and city governments to make sure that we're thinking about the actions that we can use to create the futures that we want. And just to reiterate the keynote speakers, it's been a wonderful collaboration with FutureTales LAB by MQDC, mostly because we've got these aligned values where we can collaborate together and therefore produce this fantastic work and start to guide cities to be more sustainable. Yeah, so foresight is the practice of systematically analysing the future to inform the decisions that we make. And so in this project, we've used a really great method for detailing what the trends are that we can use. So the foresight process that we've been using is a morphological box approach. And we started by doing a horizon scan where we went out and we asked a lot of different stakeholders, what do you think the trends are that are shaping the future of Bangkok? And we came up with hundreds of different trends, which we slowly went through and sorted through and worked out which ones were the most contextual and impactful for Bangkok. And we narrowed these down to about 35, and then we looked at those and we looked at how they work together in order to create the mega trends that we're going to share with you today. After this process, we used we created a set of key factors and then used the morphological box approach to create a number of scenarios, and we'll be sharing those with you in the next session. So hopefully we'll see you all then as well. And I'm going to hand over now to Dr. George Quesada, who's going to talk you through a bit more of the detail of the process that we went through.
So I'll introduce to the key definitions for our work. So when we were talking about urbanisation, we came up as a team with our own definition, which was transforming new and existing urban areas to attract people and meet the future needs of communities and the environment. And our target audience for this futures analysis was urban policymakers, planners and property developers. And as you can see from that definition, well-being is a core theme that ran through our work. And of course, when we think about the transformation that Thailand has undergone, last 30 or so years, it's gone from being mostly rural country to predominantly urbanized, and also in that time, Bangkok has also transformed dramatically, doubling in size. So urbanization, or the pace of urbanization at that scale is quite a challenge, and it can often lead to haphazard planning and some key social and environmental vulnerabilities and risks. And so we were very much looking at the future with that context in mind, and as Dr. Kandi mentioned, thinking about these growth challenges as it pertains to the areas around the Bangkok metropolitan area, which we called Greater Bangkok. And this really captures not just sort of the spillover urbanization that's happening, but there's also mega projects going on, like the high-speed rail line that's planned, and so when you see projects of that scale, and then urbanization in neighboring towns and cities, you start to think about this as a city region or a mega region, is often how it's referred to. So what do we mean by megatrends? This is the focus of our discussion today. Megatrends tell a big picture story about how a combination of trends could interact and build on each other to cause dramatic change. Trends like population growth and aging are patterns of change that can be observed over time. For this project, our megatrends analysis also included an aspect of the social domain that related to values, which is a really important feature, and that highlighted the important cultural principles that will shape the Thai response to global change. Things like inclusion, the importance of family, collectivism, and so forth. Principles which are deeply ingrained in Thai society. Now, some cultural values will inevitably change with urban and economic development, while others may not. The point is that communities don't just passively wait for trends and megatrends to impact them, but they're intimately involved in the process of change. And we think about megatrends as having global scope, but their implications can be assessed at the local level. For example, urbanization itself is a megatrend. It's a global phenomenon, and it's made up of many trends that are also global in scale, like population growth, economic development and shifts in job markets, the rise of the consumer society, and so on. We seek to identify and track megatrends because they can signal possible disruptions and risks. For example, during the 19th century, cities across Europe and North America grew rapidly, just as Asia has in recent decades. And part of that involved a doubling in the mortality rate due to poor sanitation in these cities. So that was on the risk side or the challenge side. On the positive side, there were some technological innovations like the invention of the automobile and electricity. So in our megatrends analysis, we're thinking about both sides. What are the challenges and what are the opportunities?
Before we jump to next slide, Josh, that's also kind of like helped me to trigger the thought when we talk about megatrend, because when we look at the literature out there, normally megatrend can be something as a driving force as a global trend. But in this case, the beauty of this report or this research is to focus about the Greater Bangkok. And as Dr. Kandi mentioned earlier, it's not about like our hometown, and not about that only the reason. But do you also see in terms of how we can use this Greater Bangkok, and then we can also lay down later in terms of like how we can extract the Greater Bangkok megatrend into the other use for the future and also other city as well?
For sure, yeah. I think there are plenty of cities in Southeast Asia and perhaps Central Asia as well, or Southern Asia, that are really going through a similar transformation right now, and mega cities in Asia that are really grappling with the challenges of scale of urbanization at that level, and really looking for solutions, whether it be some plan to decentralize and enabling that with transport infrastructure, So yeah, I think there's definitely some important reflections that I think could be relevant to the wider region. Yeah.
And I think also not just when we're talking about the similarities, but also the differences are quite beautiful. And I think there's a lot that the world can learn from the cultural values and the different ways of life in Thailand that really penetrates throughout what can be achieved.
So shall we move on to next one?
So we framed the impact of these megatrends in terms of outcomes for urbanisation, and this is our model to illustrate those outcomes. In the centre there are sort of the more human-centric outcomes of how people live, work, play, learn, sustain, and then as we move out, we're dealing with some of the physical aspects of cities, and then that outer circle deals with the environment. We've also created a set of trends cards from this work to actually be used by stakeholders in their own workshops and their own discussions about the forces shaping the future, and that's something that we can share as well. Now, this picture illustrates the array of trends across those societal domains: social, technological, economic, environmental, political, and values domains, and how they combined to form our 7 megatrends.